Lydia Osei was the kind of woman people prayed their sons would marry, calm, respectful, kind-hearted, and full of quiet beauty that spoke louder than makeup. When she married Daniel, it was the talk of the neighborhood. He was a bank manager, confident and tall, with a smile that could charm anyone into trust. Their wedding was the sort that left single girls jealous, and aunties crying tears of pride. In the first year, their love looked like something straight out of a fairy tale. Daniel would drive across town just to have lunch with her, send her flowers for no reason, and tell his friends, "Lydia is the best thing that ever happened to me." They were inseparable. They shared everything, laughter, plans, and secrets. Or at least, Lydia thought they did. Life seemed perfect. They lived in a cozy duplex in Surulere, with a small garden where Lydia planted her favorite flowers. She often told people, "I don't need too much. I just want peace." And for a while, peace was all she knew. She'd wake up early, prepare Daniel's breakfast, and kiss him goodbye at the door. In the evenings, they'd sit outside and talk about their dreams, a bigger house, children, maybe opening a restaurant for her someday. It all sounded so possible. To Lydia, her husband's love felt like a shield against the world. She had no idea that same shield would one day become the sword that would pierce her heart. Then, gradually, small cracks began to appear, so tiny she almost ignored them. Daniel stopped saying, "I love you" first. He started coming home later than usual. He began carrying 2 phones. He became distant but polite, loving but unavailable. Lydia blamed work stress. She never imagined that the man who once couldn't stand a minute without calling her would someday go 3 days without asking how she was. Every story has a turning point, but Lydia didn't see hers coming. It started not with a fight, but with a change in tone, a new silence between words, and an unfamiliar look in Daniel's eyes that said, "You no longer excite me." It began with small excuses. Daniel would say traffic was bad, or my boss delayed me, or I had to meet clients. Lydia believed him, because that's what love does. It gives the benefit of the doubt even when truth is knocking loudly. Soon, late nights turned into early mornings. He would come home smelling like expensive cologne she never bought him, humming tunes she didn't recognize. He started answering calls on the balcony, whispering, laughing softly. Once, Lydia walked into the sitting room to hand him tea, and he jumped like a child caught stealing. He smiled nervously and said, "Just a client, don't overthink things." But her heart had already started sinking. The emotional distance hurt more than the physical one. Daniel began sleeping with his back to her. He no longer touched her hair like he used to, or teased her about snoring. He avoided eye contact, and his phone became a living thing, always locked, always close to him. Lydia noticed the difference in his laughter. He still laughed, but never with her. The house, once filled with shared joy, became quiet like a morning room. She tried to fix things the only way she knew how, by being better. She cooked his favorite meals, wore the dress he liked, and waited up for him every night. But you cannot love someone enough to make them stay when their heart has already left the building. Still, Lydia prayed. She fasted. She went to church, kneeling quietly in the last pew, asking God to restore her home. Yet, even faith felt heavy when she was the only one holding the roof. Her friends told her to spice up her marriage. Her mother told her, maybe he just needs time. Lydia told herself, he'll come around. But deep down, a storm was forming, and every act of pretending peace was another way of feeding the thunder. She was trying to keep a house that love had already moved out of. One quiet Sunday morning, Lydia was doing laundry when she found a small folded paper in Daniel's jeans pocket, a hotel receipt. It was dated 2 weekends ago, when he had told her he was traveling to Abuja for a work conference. Her heart thumped so hard she could hear it echo. She stared at the paper like it was a snake. The name on the booking wasn't hers. It simply said, Mr. Daniel Osei and guest. She sat down on the bed, her hands shaking, her breath uneven. The room seemed to close in on her. She didn't know whether to scream or cry, so she did neither. She folded the receipt and placed it back exactly where she found it. If love was an exam, this was the part where she finally stopped trying to pass. That night, when Daniel came home, she couldn't look at him without seeing that paper in her mind. He talked freely about his busy day, about a difficult client, about traffic, the same familiar lies. Lydia nodded, smiled, served his food, and went to bed early. But her silence was not peace anymore. It was war, quiet and deep. She knew confronting him now would be useless. He'd deny it, twist it, and somehow make her the problem. So, she played along. She began watching him carefully, who he called, what time he left, how long his showers took. She didn't want to spy. She just wanted confirmation that she wasn't going mad. And confirmation came sooner than expected. A few days later, she saw a message flash briefly on his second phone while he was showering. It read, "Miss you already," and the contact name was Tessie. Lydia locked herself in the bathroom and wept silently, so no one would hear. Not because of Tessie, but because she realized the man she married no longer existed. He had been replaced by someone who smiled like him, spoke like him, but loved someone else entirely. That night, Lydia lay beside him, eyes open, whispering into the dark. So this is what dying while still breathing feels like. The next weekend, Lydia couldn't hold it in anymore. She called her mother and told her everything. She expected a reaction, anger, empathy, maybe even advice. But her mother sighed deeply and said, "Ah, Lydia, my daughter. All men do it. Just focus on your home." Her father, overhearing the conversation, added, "Don't embarrass us. Oh, don't go shouting in public or packing out like those foolish women. Be wise. Endure." The words landed like stones in her chest. It wasn't advice, it was dismissal. She hung up slowly, feeling more alone than ever. Later that week, her father called again, this time more sternly. "Listen, Lydia," he said, "if you walk out of that marriage, forget about this house. You'll disgrace this family. We didn't raise you to be a quitter." Her mother tried to soften it, but the damage was done. Lydia felt trapped, a prisoner with her own surname engraved on the door. Even her younger brother laughed one evening and said, "You women, you cry over small cheating. If you see what my friends do, you'll thank God." Lydia smiled weakly, but inside, something cold was forming. She realized that the people who should have protected her would rather protect appearances. That night, she stood by the window, looking out at the streetlights, and whispered to herself, "If peace means pretending, then maybe I've been peaceful for too long." It was the first time she began to imagine life outside the marriage. Not as a fantasy, but as a survival plan. The seed of escape had been planted, quietly, painfully, and with no one's permission. Lydia's 32nd birthday was supposed to be a happy day. Daniel organized a small dinner at a restaurant. Family and friends were there. Everyone laughed, clapped, took pictures. Lydia smiled through it all, trying to feel something. Halfway through the meal, Daniel's phone rang. He smiled widely, picked it up without hesitation, and said, "Tessie, baby, let me call you later. I'm in a small family dinner." The table went silent. The word baby hung in the air like poison gas. Lydia froze, her hand gripping the edge of her chair. A few people coughed awkwardly. Others looked away. Daniel laughed it off. Don't mind me. My colleagues always disturb me." But the damage was done. After the dinner, she walked quietly beside him to the car. He was humming, pretending nothing happened. When they got home, she said softly, "You could have respected me in front of people." He looked at her blankly and said, "Don't start. It was just a call." His tone was sharp, final, unapologetic. That was the last drop. Lydia didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, went inside, and locked the bathroom door. For 2 hours, she sat on the cold tiles, staring at the wall, replaying every moment of their marriage. By the time she came out, her eyes were dry, her heart calm, and her decision made. That night, Daniel slept soundly beside her, unaware that his wife had quietly crossed a point of no return. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking of everything she'd done to save their home, the prayers, the patience, the pain. None of it mattered anymore. In the stillness of that night, Lydia whispered the first words of her new life. "I'm done begging to be respected." She didn't know when or how, but she knew one thing. She was going to leave. And when she did, no one would see it coming. After that birthday humiliation, Lydia changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, but quietly, like water turning to ice. She stopped crying. She stopped asking questions. She no longer begged Daniel for attention or explanations. She greeted him with soft smiles, cooked his meals on time, and even ironed his clothes again. To him, it looked like she had finally matured. He told his friend at work, "My wife has learned sense at last." She stopped nagging. What he didn't know was that her calmness was not submission, it was calculation. Every night, while he snored beside her, Lydia wrote in a small brown notebook, listing the things she would need to survive on her own: passport, a little cash, important documents, contacts of an old friend in Ghana, who once said, "If you ever get tired of Lagos, come visit." Lydia became a quiet actress in her own home. She laughed at Daniel's jokes again, asked about his work, even massaged his shoulders on weekends. It was her camouflage, a peace that hid a storm. He began to trust her again, leaving his phone lying around, no longer suspicious. She noticed that when a woman stops fighting, men often mistake it for forgiveness. They never realize it's the sound of detachment. One evening, Daniel returned from work and found her cooking jollof rice and singing. He smiled proudly. "That's the wife I married." Lydia turned briefly, smiled, and replied, "Yes, the same one." Inside, she felt a small ache, not for him, but for the version of herself she had lost in that marriage. Weeks passed. She made no mention of the betrayal again. Instead, she began to talk about her dream of owning a food business. She told him she wanted to be useful, to make money, and stop depending too much. Daniel liked the idea. It appealed to his ego. He had always wanted a wife who could make her own money, but still remain beneath him. So, when Lydia mentioned she needed $10 million to start, he didn't think twice. "I'll transfer it," he said, patting her shoulder. She smiled, hiding the tremor in her fingers. That night, after he slept, she stood by the window, staring at the city lights. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped, she felt powerful. She whispered to herself, "Let him sleep. Tomorrow begins my real freedom." The next morning, Lydia presented a neatly written proposal for her supposed food delivery venture. Daniel laughed and said, "You're really serious about this thing?" She smiled. "Yes, I want to contribute." Without hesitation, he called his account officer and transferred the full amount. 10 million naira for your dream, he said, sounding generous. Lydia looked at him, pretending to be emotional. "Thank you, Daniel. You won't regret this." He hugged her briefly, not noticing that her eyes were completely dry. That hug was not between lovers anymore. It was a farewell disguised as affection. That week, Lydia began packing discreetly. She didn't rush. She moved some clothes into a friend's house nearby under the pretense of sending them for repairs. She gathered her documents, withdrew part of the money in cash, and kept the rest in a hidden foreign exchange account. Each night she went to bed with Daniel, but woke up mentally elsewhere. He didn't see it. Pride blinds faster than love. He still bragged to his friends, "My wife is perfect now. I knew she'd come around." Meanwhile, the perfect wife he spoke of was already rehearsing her exit. By the end of the month, Lydia had everything ready. Her passport, a few clothes, the cash, and the courage she'd prayed for. One evening, she cooked Daniel's favorite meal, pounded yam with a gussie, and served it with a smile. "You're glowing lately," he said. She replied softly, "Peace looks good on everyone." That night, after dinner, she sat quietly watching him scroll through his phone, laughing at something Tessie probably sent. She felt no jealousy anymore, only pity. It was strange how love could turn into calm indifference, how a heart could stop breaking simply because it was finally empty. At 3:30 a.m., when the city slept, Lydia folded her last dress into her bag and zipped it slowly. She stood by the bed, looked at Daniel one last time, and whispered, "May your next lesson be harder than mine." Morning broke beautifully, sunlight, birds, and the quiet hum of traffic. Daniel woke up stretching and calling, "Lydia, where's my towel?" No answer. He walked into the kitchen, empty. The living room, silent. He checked her wardrobe, half empty. A note lay on the dresser, beside her wedding ring. It read, "Thank you for teaching me what peace is not. Keep the house, keep the memories." I'll keep my sanity. Daniel froze. His first reaction was disbelief. She's joking, he muttered. He searched the house frantically, then called her number. The number you have dialed is not reachable. His chest tightened. He called again. Same voice. Same emptiness. Panic replaced anger. Within hours, he drove to her parents' house shouting, "Where is she?" They stared at him, shocked. Her mother began crying. Her father barked, "You mean she's missing?" Daniel shouted, "She took my money." They called her siblings, friends, and cousins. No one knew where she was. It was as though the ground swallowed her. Daniel returned home that night to a house that felt haunted. Every corner smelled of absence. He tore through drawers looking for clues, old letters, bank slips, her perfume, anything. But Lydia had planned it too well. There was no mistake, no trail, no clue. In the days that followed, Daniel's pride turned into obsession. He filed a police report, describing her as a woman who ran off with marital funds. Officers came, took notes, and promised to check. But Lydia had left no trace. Not a single camera, not a single friend, not even social media. It was as if she never existed. For a man who believed control was power, Daniel was now powerless. The silence mocked him more than her presence ever did. For the first time in years, he felt fear, not fear of losing money, but fear of realizing she might actually be better off without him. While Daniel paced the streets of Lagos searching, Lydia sat quietly on a long-distance bus heading toward Accra. She wore a headscarf and carried only one medium-sized bag. Around her were strangers, mothers, traders, children, none knowing she was a woman escaping from a life that once looked perfect. The journey was long, hot, and bumpy, but she didn't complain. Every kilometer felt like a piece of her old life falling away. When the bus crossed the border, she exhaled deeply. For the first time in years, she didn't have to look over her shoulder. She smiled faintly and whispered, "Freedom smells like dust and diesel." When Lydia arrived in Ghana, she didn't know a single soul except an old friend, Efua, whom she hadn't spoken to in years. She found a cheap guest house in Nima and spent her first night there staring at the ceiling fan, asking herself if she'd done the right thing. But then she remembered Daniel's smirk, his voice calling another woman baby, and her parents telling her to endure it. "Yes," she said to herself, "I chose life." The next morning, she walked around Accra until she found a small food stall for rent. The owner, an elderly man, smiled and said, "You look like someone who can cook." She laughed, her first genuine laugh in years. Within a few weeks, Lydia, now calling herself Amara, started selling home-cooked rice and stew. At first, business was slow, but her food carried a taste of heart and patience, and word spread fast. Taxi drivers, market women, and students became her regulars. Every night, she would sit outside her small rented room, counting her earnings and whispering prayers of gratitude. The money wasn't much, but peace was priceless. For the first time, she slept deeply without hearing footsteps of a man who didn't love her anymore. By her second year in Ghana, Amara had become a name people respected. She saved diligently and expanded her small food stall into a cozy roadside eatery. Her laughter returned, not the timid laughter of a woman seeking approval, but the confident laughter of someone who had survived the storm and come out clean. Her customers adored her. "Auntie Ama, your food gets spirit," they would joke. She'd smile and reply, "It's the spirit of peace." She was no longer Lydia, the woman who cried in silence. She was Amara, the woman who built herself from the ground up. Her success didn't come without struggle. There were days she woke up sick but still cooked, nights she counted money with tears of exhaustion. But unlike her past life, these were honest tears, not the kind that beg someone to change. She began teaching herself English and bookkeeping, determined to make her small business grow. When she passed a mirror one morning, she barely recognized herself, stronger eyes, brighter face, lighter heart. She realized she didn't need validation anymore. She had become the kind of woman she once wished she had the courage to be. Meanwhile, back in Nigeria, Daniel was still telling people that his wife would come crawling back one day. But inside him was a growing hollowness that even Tessie's laughter couldn't fill. Lydia didn't know, and she didn't care. Her heart no longer had space for bitterness. Each day, she served food with a smile and whispered a quiet prayer for the woman she used to be, the one who stayed too long. Ghana had become her healing ground, and she had finally found what she always wanted: peace without permission. Life in Ghana was not a straight line of success for Lydia, or Amara, as everyone now called her. The early months tested her resolve like fire refines gold. She worked tirelessly, waking before dawn to cook stew and jollof rice, then carrying heavy pots to the roadside stall she rented from an old man named Kwaku. She smiled at every customer, no matter how tired she was, because she knew what hunger felt like, not hunger of the stomach, but hunger for peace. Slowly, her warmth drew people to her stall. Taxi drivers, market women, and security guards began calling her Auntie Ama with a magic hand. Each bowl she served carried pieces of her healing, and every laugh shared over her food was another layer of her brokenness melting away. Her hands became rough from work, but her spirit became smoother, calmer, freer, lighter. Months turned into a year, and Lydia started saving small amounts every week in a wooden box under her bed. She didn't chase wealth. She just wanted stability, something Daniel's love never gave her. She grew close to Kwaku, who often told her, "You carry grace, my daughter. Some people are born to start over." That phrase became her daily motivation. By her second year, she was able to rent a small concrete shop and paint it orange. She named it Amara's Kitchen, though no one knew the name was once the meaning of her new identity, Grace. Her customers increased. Soon, she hired 2 girls, Efua and Ajoa, who treated her like an older sister. They sometimes teased her, saying, "Auntie Ama, you never talk about your husband. Is he in the army?" She would smile and reply, "No, my dear. He's just in another country called the past." They would laugh, not knowing that behind those words lived years of silence and survival. With time, Amara began to enjoy her own company again. She would close her restaurant early on Sundays, take long walks to the beach, and sit under palm trees watching the sunset. Each wave reminded her of the night she left Lagos, the fear, the rush, the quiet victory. She wrote letters to herself in a small notebook, telling her future self to never forget where she came from. "You were not rescued," she wrote one night. "You walked out of fire barefoot and still came out clean." Ghana became her classroom of self-worth. For the first time in years, she didn't wake up with a heavy heart. She woke up knowing she had something more valuable than any house or ring: peace of mind. Back in Lagos, Daniel tried hard to convince himself that life was good. He still had his job, still looked sharp, still laughed loudly at work events. But inside, the silence in his home was deafening. Lydia's absence echoed through everything: the neatly arranged wardrobe, the untouched breakfast table, even the way sunlight hit the living room curtains. He tried to replace her presence with noise, parties, new clothes, and late-night hangouts with friends. He often told people, "My wife traveled, but she'll return soon. She can't survive without me." He believed it, or at least he needed to. Pride has a way of lying louder than truth. His friends nodded along, though many of them had already heard rumors that Lydia had moved abroad. Daniel brushed it off, telling himself that she'd get tired of independence and come crawling back. He dated casually for a while, a few women here and there, mostly for distraction. But none stayed. They either complained that he was emotionally distant or that he compared everyone to that quiet woman who cooked too well. He didn't realize it, but Lydia had left a mark in him that nothing could erase. She was the only person who ever made his house feel like a home, the only person who spoke softly but made him listen. When he looked at Tessie, the woman he once flaunted like a prize, he saw nothing but noise, loud laughter, endless demands, and a heart that couldn't spell loyalty. But Daniel didn't stop seeing her immediately. His ego wanted to prove something, even though deep down he was just lonely. On weekends, he sometimes sat alone on the couch, flipping through old photos on his phone. He had meant to delete them, but he couldn't. He'd scroll through pictures of Lydia in her yellow apron, smiling shyly with flour on her cheeks, or the one of them holding hands at their wedding, and he'd feel a dull ache behind his chest. Still, when his mother called to ask if he'd found her, he lied. She'll be back soon. He didn't want anyone to know how much her silence haunted him. Daniel wasn't thinner, poorer, or miserable. No, he still looked strong and successful. But for the first time, he understood that true emptiness isn't visible. It hides behind polished shoes and iron shirts, and it sleeps beside an unmade bed. Tessie, the woman who once seemed exciting, began showing her true colors soon after. She spent Daniel's money recklessly, new phones, new wigs, constant spa visits. When he tried to complain, she rolled her eyes and said, "A beg, you're stingy. Even your wife didn't suffer like this." Her words cut deeper than a knife. She was careless, ungrateful, and loud, but Daniel tolerated it for a while, partly because he was ashamed to admit to himself that Lydia had been the better woman. The thrill that once blinded him had long faded, replaced by irritation and guilt. He began staying longer at work just to avoid her. But Tessie was not one to be ignored. When Daniel stopped funding her lifestyle, she started seeing another man behind his back. One morning, he woke up to an empty apartment. Tessie was gone. So were his car keys, ATM card, and wristwatch collection. On the dining table, she left a note written in pink pen. "You're too boring. Find someone who claps for your silence. Buy sugar." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Claps for my silence?" he repeated. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had once demanded Lydia's silence, and now it was all he had left. For the first time, he understood what Lydia might have felt, the coldness, the humiliation, the emptiness. Karma didn't hit him with thunder. It came wearing a perfume he used to love. Still, Daniel refused to admit defeat. He cleaned his apartment, replaced the stolen items, and told his colleagues Tessie had traveled abroad for work. He carried himself with dignity, but inside, he was haunted. Every sound in that apartment reminded him of Lydia, the way she used to hum softly while folding laundry, the way she'd leave his water warm and ready in the morning. He would catch himself calling her name in his sleep. Sometimes he'd wake up and whisper, "Lydia, you won." But even then, he didn't cry. He wasn't broken. He was proud, functional, but empty in all the quiet ways that pride never fixes. 7 years passed before Lydia thought about home again. Her life in Ghana had become peaceful, almost sacred. She had expanded her small eatery into 2 branches, employed several women, and even started mentoring young girls who'd been abandoned or mistreated. Her heart had healed, not with riches or revenge, but with purpose. Then one evening, while counting her day's earnings, she received a message from her younger brother. It was short and trembling. "Papa is sick. He keeps calling your name." Lydia dropped the phone, her hands suddenly cold. For years, she had refused to call them, still wounded by how her family told her to endure a man who broke her. But now, the thought of her father on a hospital bed, whispering her name, melted her resentment. She sat by her window that night, staring at the across skyline. Her heart wrestled between pride and compassion. "Do I owe them my presence?" she whispered. The wind offered no answer. She thought of her father's voice years ago, saying, "Don't disgrace this family." Now the same man was asking for her forgiveness. Pain and forgiveness have the same face, both make you cry. The next morning, Lydia went to the bank, withdrew some money, and booked a flight to Lagos. She told her staff, "I need to visit someone from my past." They wished her well, thinking it was just a short trip. But deep down, Lydia knew she wasn't just going home to visit her father. She was going home to face the ghost of everything she left behind. The journey felt strange. As the plane descended into Lagos, Lydia's stomach fluttered. Every landmark triggered old memories, the smell of suya in the streets, the loud horns, the familiar chaos. It was the same city that once suffocated her, now welcoming her back like a healed wound. She arrived at her parents' house quietly. Her mother gasped when she saw her, dropping her plate in shock. "Lydia, Jesus Christ, is this really you?" She hugged her daughter tightly, crying uncontrollably. Her father, weak but conscious, whispered from his bed, "Forgive us, my daughter. We failed you." Lydia knelt beside him, tears streaming. "Papa," she said softly, "you didn't fail me. You just didn't understand what kind of storm I was in." The house that once echoed with judgment now filled with remorse and unexpected peace. For days, Lydia stayed with her parents, nursing her father and helping around the house. The neighbors came to see her, some shocked, some pretending they had always supported her decision. Her mother followed her everywhere, touching her shoulder and saying, "You're glowing, my child. God must have treated you well." Lydia smiled. "God didn't treat me well, Mama. I treated myself well." The family spent long evenings reminiscing, but Lydia noticed that her father never stopped saying sorry. One night, she sat beside his bed and said, "Papa, stop apologizing. God used that pain to rebuild me." He smiled faintly. "I just wish we told you to leave earlier," he said. "Maybe your scars would be fewer." She touched his hand and replied, "The scars became my lessons. Without them, I'd still be blind." Word spread quietly that Lydia was back in Lagos. Old friends who once avoided her started calling, pretending to care. "Lydia, we thank God for your life," they said, as if they hadn't mocked her before. She smiled and forgave them silently. She had learned that forgiveness wasn't always for others. Sometimes it was just a way to stop dragging heavy memories around. On the fourth day, she decided to visit the supermarket near their old house to buy groceries. The area had changed, but the air smelled the same, a mix of dust, roasted corn, and nostalgia. She smiled at the memories flooding back, unaware that destiny was waiting for her just a few meters ahead. As she stepped out of the supermarket, carrying her bags, she froze. There, across the street, stood Daniel, older, still tall, neatly dressed, holding a bag of roasted corn. Time stopped for a moment. Their eyes met. Daniel blinked twice, as if unsure whether she was real or a ghost. The corn slipped from his hand. "Lydia," he whispered. The sound of her name from his lips after so many years sent a strange shiver through her, not of pain, but of closure. She smiled softly. "Daniel," she said, "you still like roasted corn?" He stared at her, speechless. Life had brought them back together not as husband and wife, but as two stories that once shared a chapter and now stood as separate books, finally closed but never forgotten. Daniel stood frozen across the street, the bag of roasted corn still in his hand, as if time had stopped right where it needed to hurt. He hadn't changed much, same broad shoulders, same confident walk, but the sharpness in his eyes had softened, replaced by something he probably didn't even recognize: humility. Lydia, on the other hand, stood calm and collected. Her aura was different now, composed, mature, no longer desperate for approval. She walked toward him slowly, her ankara gown swaying in the breeze, her expression a soft smile that carried neither anger nor affection. "Daniel," she said gently, "you still like roasted corn?" The way she said it made him swallow hard, as though her voice carried every memory he'd ever buried. "Lydia," he whispered, still unsure she was real. "You came back." She nodded slightly. "Yes, I came home. I had unfinished peace to make." Their eyes met, two souls with years of silence between them, and for a moment, even the noise of Lagos faded away. They stood under the fading afternoon sun for a while, not talking, just breathing the same air again after so many years. Daniel finally gestured toward a small wooden bench outside a shop. "Can we sit?" he asked quietly, his tone unfamiliar, respectful, cautious. Lydia agreed. As they sat, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was revealing. She looked at him closely. He looked healthy, still handsome, still proud, but his laughter had lost its echo. There was a faint tiredness around his eyes, not from suffering, but from learning the hard way that peace cannot be replaced with pride. "You disappeared," he said, shaking his head softly. No note, no call, nothing. Lydia looked at him with a calm expression and replied, "You didn't notice when I was there. Why would you notice when I was gone?" Her voice wasn't bitter. It was steady, like someone who had healed so deeply that the wound became wisdom. Daniel dropped his gaze to the ground. He wanted to speak, but words failed him. They sat there until dusk began to paint the sky orange. Daniel finally said, "You look different, stronger, happier." Lydia smiled faintly. "I should. I spent years learning how to breathe without choking on memories." He nodded, ashamed of the man he had been, loud, proud, blind. "I used to think you were weak," he confessed. "Now I know you were just too kind for me." She looked at him for a long moment and said, "Kindness without respect is slavery." The words landed like soft thunder. He nodded again, this time in surrender. The wind blew between them, carrying away what was left of bitterness, leaving only quiet understanding, not reconciliation, not revenge, just truth finally allowed to speak. The next day, Daniel asked if they could meet properly. Lydia agreed, not because she wanted closure, she already had that, but because she wanted to look at her past without flinching. They met at a small garden restaurant near her old church. It was quiet, with trees swaying gently and the smell of fried plantain drifting through the air. When Daniel arrived, he was already there, sitting upright, nervous like a schoolboy. As she approached, he stood up politely. "You look good," he said softly. "So do you," she replied, though her voice carried more calm than warmth. They sat, ordered water, and for a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "I used to think you'd never leave me," he said. "I thought you'd keep forgiving me, no matter what I did." Lydia tilted her head slightly, smiling sadly. "That was your problem. You thought I'd always choose you, even when you stopped choosing me." The conversation stretched for hours, not in anger, but in truth. Daniel admitted he had lost everything that truly mattered long before she left. "I had everything, money, status, attention, but the house felt dead without you. It was like living in a room that stopped breathing." Lydia listened quietly, her face soft but unreadable. "You hurt me deeply, Daniel," she said, her voice steady. "Not just with Tessie, but with the way you made me feel invisible. You turned my love into labor. I tried to fix us, but I was the only one working." Daniel nodded, guilt filling his eyes. "I was proud. I thought being a man meant control. I didn't realize real strength is treating your woman like your mirror, not your shadow." She smiled faintly at that. "At least you learned something," she replied. "It only took a lifetime." Daniel looked at her longingly. "Can we start again? Maybe not as husband and wife, but as two people who know better." Lydia shook her head slowly, her eyes kind but firm. "No, Daniel. You and I finished our story the day I packed my bags. If we add more pages, we'll only ruin the ending." He sighed, covering his face with his hands. "I never thought I'd live to see the day you'd say no to me." Lydia smiled gently. "You never thought I'd live to say it and mean it." Then she looked away, her eyes glistening, but dry. She had already cried all her tears years ago. That meeting wasn't about reunion, it was about release. They both knew it. Weeks passed after their meeting, but the memory of that conversation refused to leave Daniel's mind. He kept replaying every word, every pause, every moment Lydia looked at him, without hate, and he realized that was what hurt most. She wasn't angry anymore. She didn't need to shout or remind him of his sins. Her peace was punishment enough. He went about his daily life, still neatly dressed, still punctual, still successful. But inside, something had gone quiet. He would drive past familiar places, the restaurant where they once celebrated anniversaries, the shop where she bought his shirts, and feel a lump in his throat. He realized now that regret doesn't always come as tears. Sometimes it comes as silence that follows you everywhere you go. One afternoon, Daniel went through his drawer and found the last photograph they ever took together. Lydia smiling, him holding her waist possessively. He touched her face in the picture and whispered, "You deserved more." He wanted to call her, to say thank you for forgiving him, but he knew it would sound hollow now. She had moved on, not to another man, but to another version of herself, one that didn't need his validation. His mother visited one weekend and said, "You should remarry." He smiled faintly and replied, "I'm already married to my lessons." She didn't understand what he meant, but he did. The image of Lydia's calm face that day haunted him more than any nightmare ever could. She had given him something Tessie or anyone else never could, truth. Meanwhile, Lydia had returned to Ghana briefly after her visit, but something had shifted inside her too. Seeing Daniel again didn't reopen wounds, it sealed them. For years, she had imagined what she would say if they ever met again. Harsh words, perhaps a slap, maybe tears. But when the moment came, all she felt was peace. She finally realized healing isn't loud. It's a quiet acceptance that comes when the pain no longer defines you. She prayed for Daniel one night, not with bitterness, but with pity. May he one day find peace too, she whispered. Her heart was light. Closure, she learned, wasn't hearing "I'm sorry." It was being able to say, "I forgive you," and mean it with a steady voice. A month later, Lydia returned to Nigeria briefly to attend a women's empowerment event in her hometown. After the program, she decided to visit the beach alone. The evening sun glowed golden, and waves crashed softly against the shore. She sat on a rock, removed her sandals, and let the cold water wash over her feet. From her purse, she pulled out a small envelope. Inside was 10 million, the same amount Daniel had once given her, now returned to him. She had delivered it earlier that morning through a trusted friend with a simple note. "This was the seed of my new life. I return it with gratitude. Keep your peace." Daniel had opened it and stared at it for hours, stunned by her calmness. He didn't know whether to feel shame or admiration. That night he sat in his car, clutching the envelope, whispering, "She's freer than I'll ever be." At the beach, Lydia smiled as she watched children play and lovers take selfies. Life had come full circle. She thought about how far she'd come, from a scared woman who once hid her tears under her pillow to the strong woman who now gave back what once enslaved her. "You've done well," she told herself softly. She took off the simple chain around her neck, the one that had held her old wedding ring for years, and stared at it for a long time. It no longer hurt to see it. It just looked like a story she had finished reading. Without hesitation, she threw it into the sea. The ring hit the water and disappeared beneath the waves. She smiled. "That chapter is gone," she whispered. The wind caught her hair, brushing against her face like a final blessing. That night, Daniel sat alone in his living room, reading Lydia's note over and over. He wasn't crying. Tears wouldn't come. Instead, a deep ache filled his chest, one that came with realization, not grief. He stood up, looked around his house. Everything was neat, organized, quiet, and said to himself, "I had peace in my hands, and I chased noise instead." He walked to the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Somewhere, he imagined Lydia sitting peacefully, smiling, living free. He exhaled and whispered, "I hope she never looks back." It was not self-pity, it was truth. For once, Daniel understood that love, without respect, ends where pride begins, and sometimes regret doesn't destroy you. It keeps you alive just to remind you what you lost. Years passed, but Lydia's story continued to ripple quietly through every life she touched. Her restaurant in Ghana expanded into a small chain, each branch managed by one of the women she had once mentored. She became known not as the woman who ran away from her husband, but as the woman who built peace from pain. She never remarried. She didn't need to. Her heart had become her home. When people asked her about love, she would smile and say, "Love is not always about staying. Sometimes it's about leaving before you lose yourself completely." Her laughter was easy, her words full of calm power, a kind of beauty that only comes after surviving fire. Every scar she carried now glowed like proof that she had once been brave enough to start over. Daniel, on the other hand, lived a quiet life. He never remarried either. He had money, comfort, a good job, but none of it filled the space Lydia once occupied. He often told his younger colleagues, "Respect your wife. Don't learn the hard way." They laughed, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't. Sometimes he'd drive past places they used to visit and stop just to sit in the car for a while. He wasn't thinner or sick, he was just still enough to feel the echo of his choices. He had everything that looked like success, except the one thing that used to make it mean something. Every now and then, he'd whisper her name into the night air, not hoping she'd return, but simply to remind himself that once he had known real love and lost it through arrogance. Lydia's story ended the way all strong stories should, not with revenge, but with peace. One evening, she stood outside her restaurant as the sun dipped below the horizon. The same orange glow she once saw in Lagos now painted the streets of Accra. She closed her eyes and smiled, whispering, "Thank you, Lord. You gave me peace in a place I never imagined." She thought of Daniel, not with anger or longing, but with gratitude. "He broke me," she murmured, "but the pieces built something better." The wind blew softly across her face, carrying the scent of stew and freedom. And in that moment, she knew her journey had come full circle. She didn't just survive her pain, she turned it into peace. And that, perhaps, was the sweetest revenge of all. Please like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.